The first time someone told me I was nothing, it wasn't whispered in anger or thrown during a fight. It was said calmly, like a fact everyone else already knew. We were sitting at the long dining table in my parents' house, the same table where report cards were reviewed and future plans were announced like verdicts. My brother Ethan had just been accepted into a private prep school, and my parents were glowing, already talking about Ivy League paths and legacy connections. I was 17, sitting at the far end of the table, quietly finishing my food when my uncle laughed and said, "Well, at least one of the kids turned out right." Everyone laughed. My mother smiled politely. My father didn't correct him. He just looked at me and said, "Not everyone is meant for greatness." That sentence landed, heavier than any insult. No one defended me. No one even looked uncomfortable. It was as if they had all silently agreed years ago. I learned early that in my family, value was measured in achievements that could be bragged about, grades that impressed strangers, schools that sounded expensive, careers that fit neatly into conversation. I didn't fit any of it. I struggled in traditional classrooms, not because I wasn't smart, but because my mind didn't move in straight lines. I saw patterns where others saw chaos. I questioned systems instead of memorizing them. Teachers called me distracted. My parents called me difficult. Ethan was everything I wasn't. Disciplined, predictable, impressive. By the time we reached high school, it was clear who the investment was. College funds went to tutors for him. Conversations about the future happened without me in the room. When relatives asked what I planned to do, my mother would answer for me, saying, "We're still figuring that out." The night everything broke wasn't dramatic. There was no screaming, no slammed doors. It was quiet, almost administrative. My father told me I needed to start contributing or leave. He slid an envelope across the table. Inside was $42 in cash and a bus pass. "This should help you get started," he said. My mother avoided eye contact. Ethan didn't look up from his phone. I packed a backpack that night with 2 shirts, an old laptop, and a notebook filled with half-formed ideas I'd never been encouraged to share. When I stepped outside, the house didn't feel like something I was losing. It felt like something that had already let go of me. The first year after leaving was survival. I slept on couches, in shared rooms, anywhere that didn't require questions. I worked whatever jobs would take me. Unloading trucks, cleaning offices at night, fixing broken phones at a kiosk in the mall. I learned quickly that the world didn't care about my family's opinion of me. Rent was due whether I was valued or not. Hunger didn't wait for validation. Somewhere between exhaustion and necessity, I discovered something important. When you have nothing to fall back on, you learn how to move forward fast. I started spending nights teaching myself skills no one had ever suggested. I learn code, systems design, security architecture. I wasn't trying to build a company. I was trying to understand how things worked beneath the surface. Why systems failed. Why people trusted software they didn't understand. My notebook filled up again, this time with diagrams instead of doubts. I took freelance gigs online under a fake name, fixing vulnerabilities for small businesses that couldn't afford big firms. I charged less than everyone else, not because my work was worse, but because I didn't yet understand my value. Still, the work spoke for itself. Clients came back. Then they referred others. By 22, I had a tiny operation running out of a shared apartment. No logo, no pitch deck, just results. I wasn't chasing recognition. I was chasing stability. Every dollar I made went back into learning, tools, infrastructure. I watched companies collapse because they cared more about appearances than foundations, and I promised myself I would never build something hollow. When investors reached out for the first time, I ignored them. People like me weren't supposed to be trusted with money like that. At least, That's what I'd been taught. The call that changed everything came on an ordinary Tuesday. A mid-sized firm I'd been quietly consulting for had been breached. Millions of records exposed. Panic everywhere. Their internal team froze. I didn't. I worked for 48 hours straight, isolating the damage, patching weaknesses, building safeguards they hadn't even known they needed. When it was over, the CEO asked me who I worked for. I told him the truth. Just me, I said. He laughed at first. Then he stopped. 2 weeks later, he asked if I'd consider building something bigger. That was the beginning of the thing my family would later call overnight success. In reality, it took years. Years of saying no to bad deals. Years of building quietly while louder companies burned fast and bright. I hired slowly. I trusted carefully. I remembered every time someone had assumed I was nothing and used that memory as a filter. If someone needed me to look impressive before listening, I didn't need them. By the time the company crossed its first 100 million in valuation, I still lived modestly. Old habits from having nothing die hard. I didn't tell my family any of this. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. They hadn't asked about my life in years. Occasional messages came through relatives. Vague updates about Ethan's promotions, his wedding, his house. No one asked where I was living or what I was building. I let the distance remain. It was peaceful. The exit talks began quietly. Confidential meetings. Long nights with lawyers who treated me like I'd always belonged in those rooms. When the final number landed on the table, it didn't feel real. $700 million. Not as a fantasy. As an agreement. As something signed and enforceable. I stared at the document longer than necessary, not because I was shocked by the money, but because I was thinking about that dining table. That envelope. $42. The news broke on a Thursday morning. Headlines moved fast. My phone didn't. For hours there was silence. Then, slowly, names I hadn't seen in years began appearing on my screen. And that was when the knocking started. The first knock came just after sunset. I was standing in my kitchen, staring at my phone, watching messages stack up from numbers I hadn't saved and names I hadn't spoken aloud in years. I already knew who it would be before I reached the door. Some instincts never leave you. When I opened it, my parents stood there together, closer than I'd ever seen them, like they'd practiced this moment on the drive over. My mother's eyes were red. My father's posture, once rigid and certain, looked smaller somehow, as if gravity had finally caught up with him. Behind them, Ethan lingered near the car, pretending to scroll on his phone, pretending he wasn't afraid to look me in the eyes. No one spoke at first. The silence stretched, thick and unfamiliar. My mother broke it with my name, spoken softly, the way she used to say it when she wanted something from me without admitting it. She took a step forward, then stopped, as if unsure whether she was allowed to cross the threshold. "We saw the news," she said. Of course they had. Everyone had. My father nodded, clearing his throat, his voice careful, rehearsed. "We didn't realize how well you were doing." I waited. Years ago, I would have rushed to fill the silence, to explain myself, to earn approval. Now, I simply let them stand in it. They came inside eventually, moving through my space slowly, eyes scanning the walls, the furniture, the quiet evidence of a life built without them. My mother touched the back of a chair, almost reverently. "This place is beautiful," she said, like she was complimenting something fragile. My father stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, nodding as if inspecting a property. "You've done well," he said. The words felt strange coming from him, stripped of authority, offered instead of declared. They didn't apologize at first. They talked around the past, circling it carefully. How hard things had been. how they'd worried about me, how they'd assumed I'd figure things out eventually. Each sentence avoided the truth like it might shatter if spoken directly. Finally, my mother sat down, her hands shaking just enough for me to notice. "We made mistakes," she said. "We didn't handle things the right way." My father hesitated, then added, "We thought we were pushing you to be stronger." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and understood something I hadn't before. They weren't cruel because they hated me. They were cruel because they needed to believe their choices were right. Ethan finally came in, standing awkwardly near the door. He smiled, the same practiced smile he'd always used when situations made him uncomfortable. "Hey," he said, as if we'd just missed a weekend lunch. He congratulated me, told me how impressive everything was, mentioned how proud everyone was. I watched him carefully. When he spoke about me, it was still framed around what others would think, what this meant for the family, how surprising it all was. Nothing about the nights I slept on floors. Nothing about the years of silence. Eventually, the real reason surfaced. My father cleared his throat again. "We've been thinking," he said, "about how nice it would be to reconnect properly. As a family." My mother nodded eagerly. "Start fresh," she said. "Leave the past behind." Ethan added something about opportunities, about how I could help guide him on some investments he was considering. That was the moment everything crystallized. They didn't come because they missed me. They came because the story had changed, because the version of me they'd discarded had become valuable. I stood up then, not abruptly, but with intention. I walked to the counter and picked up the old notebook I kept there, the one with worn edges and cramped handwriting. I opened it to the first page, yellowed and creased. "This," I said, holding it up, "is what I left your house with." I told them about the $42. The backpack. The nights I wondered if they were right about me. I told them about the jobs, the failures, the years no one asked how I was doing. My voice didn't shake. I wasn't angry. I was precise. When I finished, the room was quiet again. My mother was crying openly now. My father looked at the floor. "I didn't build this to prove you wrong," I said finally. "I built it because I had to survive. And somewhere along the way, I learned who I was without needing your approval. I told them I wasn't interested in, pretending none of it happened. That reconciliation without accountability wasn't reconciliation at all." Ethan tried to speak, to soften it, to make it about misunderstandings. I stopped him gently. "You didn't misunderstand," I said. "You chose." They asked what I wanted. It was the first honest question of the night. I thought about it carefully. "I want boundaries," I said. "I want honesty. And I want you to understand that being in my life now is not a reward for me. It's a choice I get to make." My father nodded slowly. He took off his wedding ring then, turning it in his fingers absent-mindedly, a habit he had when thinking deeply. He looked up and said 4 words I never expected to hear from him. "I was wrong about you." Not an excuse. Not a justification. Just that. They left later that night quietly, without promises or demands. No dramatic reconciliation. No neat resolution. Just the understanding that things could move forward differently, if they were willing to do the work. I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, breathing in the quiet. For the first time, the silence felt earned. In the weeks that followed, life continued. The deal finalized. New responsibilities took shape. Interviews came and went. Occasionally, messages from my family arrived, careful and measured. Sometimes I replied. Sometimes I didn't. I wasn't punishing them. I was protecting myself. Success didn't fix the past, but it did give me the distance to see it clearly. They thought I was nothing, because they couldn't see beyond their own definitions of worth. The truth is, I was becoming something long before the number had a $sign attached to it. And when the world finally noticed, it wasn't a victory over them. It was a quiet confirmation of something I'd known for years. I was never nothing. I was just getting started.